Hey, what is shaking bacon? Welcome back to the Real Life Podcast. And we got a real nice episode here for you today. Trying to bring back the Real Nice Podcast. Been a little bit. Try to be a little bit more consistent for you guys. But before we get into the podcast, that I actually went on FullScale Outdoors Podcast. So that's what you're going to see is that. I will leave a link to his channel, his podcast avenues, his socials in the description. But before we jump into that, I have dropped a line of merch in order to kind of offset some of my costs, my fishing and my videos and whatnot. So if you do enjoy the channel and you want to support it even further, help me make more videos, help me make more tutorials and stuff like that, more raps, more freestyles. If you're here just for the raps, I know it's most of you. Then I have some hats out, got some shirts, some other stuff on the page. I have ball caps too. These, however, are misprints, so this is green. This will actually be yellow on the new stuff. So whatever you order, don't expect it to be green because I'm not a super big fan of the green at the moment. But that stuff's out. If you do want to help out the channel that way, thank you. I appreciate it. I continue to appreciate your guys' support on these videos and stuff. So without further ado, let's jump in to the podcast.
All right. I'm sitting here with Tyler Olrog. I think I said that right. It's just like it's spelled, right? Cool. Well, appreciate you coming on the show, taking out time. We've trying to schedule this, but we're busy people. Hardest thing, I've said it time and time again in the show, like the hardest thing about this podcast or having a podcast is scheduling. Just getting people to commit and then hammering down a time and then keeping that time. I've had to cancel on times. Other people have had to cancel on times for a score of reasons. It's just how it is. It just goes along with the territory. But here we are. Finally get to talk to you. I found you on LinkedIn, which is a platform I don't use a ton. I'm trying to use it more, not only for the podcast, but I also guide here in Minnesota. Ice fishing guide in the winter and then a bass fishing guide in the summer. I also do goose hunts in the fall and the spring. So thought that would be a good platform as a more professional platform to kind of reach out. That's where I stumbled upon your page, and you were a fisheries biologist at one point in time. And that's kind of what first caught my eye because I've been trying to reach out to some fish biologists. I like to do some deep dives on issues and stuff like that. And then in talking to you, found out that you're a fly fishing guide. You no longer live on the East Coast. Now you're in Montana. So there's a whole host of stuff that we can talk about. So what I'm going to do is kind of send it over to you, and let's just find out who Tyler is.
Yeah, it's kind of been a wild ride since college. I've done the biologist thing. I've done the guiding thing. Really enjoy both of them. I am now in Montana. I did a stint in Colorado for about 9 months, I'd say, this past year in 2020. And then I lived in Pennsylvania probably for 4 years since I graduated college to when I graduated college. And I worked my first fisheries biologist job down there as well. Originally from Buffalo, New York. Go Bills. But yeah, I've kind of been all over the place and done a whole bunch of different stuff in the last 4 or 5 years.
Cool. I don't know why. Anytime someone says Bills, I just think Doug Flutie. That's like everything that sticks out in my mind. And that ages me. I realize that. But I haven't really been, I'll be honest, I have not been paying attention to the NFL this year since the Vikings were eliminated from any sort of playoff pictures, which we pretty much eliminated ourselves in about week 4. But
it's tough.
I know it's been not a good year for the Vikes anyways. Are the Bills in it?
The Bills are in it. We're playing to make it to the AFC Championship on Saturday.
Okay. Oh, well, you're going to be – I think the Browns are making a move. I mean, no offense against you or the Bills. I honestly have no opinion of them one way or the other. Probably would root for them just because they haven't been there and for forever. But the Browns haven't been there in like the time before time. So yeah. I think they're kind of my underdog that I'm rooting for this year. But we'll see what happens. It's not going to be the Patriots, so who cares?
Exactly.
We're finally going to get a different Super Bowl. Thank God. So you're from New York, and then Pennsylvania is not too big of a move. And what facilitated that? Was there just a better fisheries biologist program in Pennsylvania than you would have found in New York?
Yeah, so there's not really that many undergraduate programs for fisheries biology. Kind of the two in New York are like SUNY ESF, which is like a branch campus to Syracuse University, and then SUNY Cobleskill, which is over by like Albany. And so I went to Mansfield University, which is actually like just across the border in Pennsylvania from New York. And so it was actually the closest one to my house, even though it was in a different state.
Sure.
So the close proximity, plus I really liked the professor when I went there and met with him. He's a super knowledgeable guy, and so I just ended up going there.
Oh, I think I'm pretty sure the U of M here in Minnesota has a pretty good fisheries biologist program, marine biology program, which makes sense. Land of 10,000 lakes.
Yeah.
You think it would, but
hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. Depends on who you ask if they know what they're doing or not. It seems like everybody has a negative opinion of the DNR and biologists. All the Monday morning quarterback biologists out there know better, right?
Yeah. Once you buy that fishing license, you know it all.
You know it all. I'm sure you. I guarantee you've run into it. What kind of projects were you working on out there in Pennsylvania?
So when I was in Pennsylvania, I got to work with trout, which is awesome. You know, I'm absolutely addicted to trout fishing and all that. And so basically what we did, like any angler that goes like blue lining, like I would look on a map on like GIS software. I'd find a blue line and say, hey, this water's unassessed. We had this big database. And we were essentially getting paid via the oil and gas industry. There's a big gas industry in Pennsylvania, and some of the mitigations from the damage that they have actually done to the land is that they pay for a biologist to assess these stuff. So that's actually how I was funded. We would just show up to these streams with electroshocking equipment. We would explore them, see if they had trout, record the data and all that. And more often than not, we found trout, which was really cool.
And so these are like trout. These aren't being stocked, right? These would be wild reproducing trout then.
Correct. Yeah, especially in Pennsylvania, we're dealing a lot with brook trout, native brookies, which is cool because being in New York, we don't have a lot of native brook trout. But yeah, we occasionally run into stock fish if there's like a tributary for a stock stream, but they're usually pretty easy to identify, and we kind of we include them in the survey, but they don't count towards the wild trout classification for that stream, obviously.
Okay, so there's not any like naturally reproducing browns or rainbows?
I mean, there's very few, I think one or two that we surveyed in Pennsylvania that has naturally reproducing rainbows. Quite a few have naturally reproducing browns, but brook trout are always, I mean, that's our native fish on the East Coast. Browns and rainbows kind of being invasive species in a way.
Yeah, that's a weird thing, right? Like
yeah.
We see these as, I mean, they've been on the landscape for so long. We don't generally view them as invasive species, but they are a problem where they do start to get into traditional brook trout waters. We have the same issue here in Minnesota. We don't have, I guess we have a fair amount of trout streams. The southeast part of the state has trout streams, and then the north shore along Lake Superior obviously has some trout streams, and then there's a few scattered here, there, and everywhere. And then Wisconsin, which I'm really close to Wisconsin. The western side of Wisconsin seems to have actually more trout streams than we do, but they don't seem to compete well with the rainbows and the browns, and probably the browns more so. They're pretty aggressive.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that we worked on actually was like gill lice, which is like a disease and it only affects the brook trout. And a lot of that stuff's kind of going underneath the radar because of how aggressive the brown trout are, where you actually see these streams where the gill lice wiped out entire populations of brown trout, but now they're class A. They wiped out entire populations of brook trout, and now they're incredibly high density brown trout streams. So, I mean, the public doesn't really see what happened there because you have now this amazing brown trout stream, but now you have a stream that was originally native brook trout. It's just devoid of them.
Are the brown trout spreading those gill lice?
There's really not a lot of stuff on that. So on the West Coast, and I dealt with this when I worked in Colorado, they have gill lice and it only affects the rainbows. And then on the East Coast, we have gill lice and it only affects the brook trout. The browns, it doesn't seem to affect them at all. They don't ever have it on them. We don't know if they can carry it or not, carry eggs, but they themselves cannot contract it. They seem to be much more hardier than the brook trout and the rainbows.
Was the gill lice an issue before brown trout were introduced? I guess would be a question.
I don't have the answer to that. The way it got spread into Pennsylvania is there's a private hatchery that brought in fish from out of state that had gill lice, and that's how it got into our Pennsylvania streams. Okay. So I only really know the origin of that. I don't know how it got here in the first place.
Seems to make sense. That's seems to be a repeatable pattern. Just in the outdoors in general. You want to talk about CWD and deer, where it's comes from some sort of domestic strain. So you got a hatchery trout. They're confined in large numbers, and then they're released. Like, that just seems to be, in general, a really poor practice. And then when that is loosed into the natural wilds, it seems to often result in bad news. Do you know what is Pennsylvania or anywhere along the Appalachians there, or what are they doing to combat that, if anything?
So what we were doing was just trying to identify where it was, and we ended up identifying 2 or 3 new streams this summer that I worked there that had gill lice, and it's pretty much just an identify and monitor thing. We don't really have a way to treat it at this point. One of the things we were doing actively to try to prevent spreading it further, being biologists that are working in multiple different streams per day, we would always carry an extra set of gear with us. And so when if we did find a stream that tested positive for gill lice, we would have to completely change our gear out. That way we didn't transmit it to a different stream. And then that gear has to be frozen for like 72 hours before it can be used again. Yeah.
You had to freeze your waders.
Waders and boots, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh crap! What was I just gonna? Something else popped into my head, and then I lost it. Something about having to swap out your gear. Well, maybe it'll come back to me. Is there anything? Are they trying to restore native brook trout waters? Are there any programs over there like that where they're actively trying to eliminate the brown trout and restore native brook trout waters? Is there anything like that going on?
Not that I'm aware of, no. Okay. I don't think there's any, it's at least not with the Fish and Boat Commission, which I worked for. I don't know what Trout Unlimited's doing in regards to that, but no, not that I know of.
Okay. I know there's another issue further east. Another gentleman I'm working to get on the show, just happens to coincide that kind of both from the East Coast, but he's in Maine, and they're working on they got I think they call them salties, but they're working on the like the sea run brook trout, and there's a huge problem there, and with Atlantic salmon too. Like, there's a whole issue there. They're stocking with the stocking fish, and I can't get too much into that because I don't know it, and I can't wait to talk to this guy. I've done a little bit of research on it, but that's like his main thing that he's focused on. So yeah, I guess I didn't know where they were at on that, but it sounds like it's been a while since you've been active in that part of the country working on stuff anyways. What did you do any guiding in Pennsylvania, or what facilitated then your move to go west and chase there?
So I actually moved west for another fisheries job that actually had guiding a part of it. I worked on a private ranch where I did mostly biologist work, but once the owners of the ranch came, then I was a full-time fishing guide, which ended up turning into being my whole summer because of COVID. It was an extended stay, so it was a long time I spent guiding this year.
That ain't the worst. That ain't the worst.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Absolutely.
And is that what was the target out there? Browns, rainbows?
Mostly rainbows. We had wild browns in the river, but we mostly managed the rainbows we managed genetics and stuff like that.
Okay, so these are hatchery. You're doing their own hatchery work then?
They are, yeah. They're in the process of building their own hatchery. We brought in fish from out of state, but we would we were very selective with our fish and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah, you don't want the gill lice.
Yeah, well, we have the gill lice.
Oh, really?
Like a lot of it, yeah. But the fish were a little bit. They're genetically modified, so they grow bigger, they fight harder.
Oh my God, we got Frankenstein fish rolling around on the mountain.
Yeah.
Oh, that's gotta be a little controversial.
It's a little controversial. The public doesn't really seem to mind all that much because they have access to the river. Not wading access, but they can float through it and catch some of these giants. There's 20+ pound rainbows in that stream. Yeah, so it's pretty fun, pretty impressive to fish for them. But yeah.
Are they putting in any of those golden trout that I hear about, or light trout? I think they call them, or something like that.
Yeah, we spent ridiculous amounts of money to put those fish in. I can't go into specifics, but yes, we have those in there.
I have to. I mean, they're kind of cool, but my personal opinion, I don't know, dude. I feel like you're catching a koi. Like they don't like.
Yeah.
I want my rainbow trout to look like rainbow trout. You know what I mean? Like.
Yeah, I mean, I had been on the ranch for a little while, and I caught my fair share of those giant fish, and I mean, they're not super hard to catch. In all honesty, they're really aggressive. So when they did put those yellow ones in there, and I caught a couple like that were this big instead of those 25 pounders, I was pretty pumped. It was pretty fun. Yeah,
I guess it's something different. I mean, you don't have a ton of variability within rainbow trout. One rainbow trout looks a lot like the next one, I guess. So throw a couple oddballs in there and looks pretty cool. I wouldn't mind catching a tiger trout, which that's what is that? It's brook trout and Brown's cross.
Brook Brown cross. Yep.
Those things look pretty cool. And they're definitely not naturally occurring. I just know it's weird to me that they're, depending on where you're at, you've got a river there. You're dumping in genetically modified trout, these special, these color phases, whatever. And then in other parts of the country, they're working really hard to get rid of rainbows, get rid of browns. They're trying to get back to, just pristine, golden trout waters, or, protecting bull trout where they're native, and then trying to get bull trout out of where they're not native. It's just there's a lot of moving pieces going on out there, and it's pretty interesting.
There's a lot of money involved in the industry, and like Colorado is a state where they invest a lot into tourism, and fishing is a huge tourism attraction. So they are not so much about taking the fish away; they're more about putting them in. And
yeah, Colorado seems to have. I mean, I feel like we're not that far from them, like releasing tigers in the wild so that people will come there and hunt them. Because like they were on the ballot this year. They had on there to vote to bring in wolves, and I know that's highly contested.
And there's already wolves there. There's already a pack of wolves there.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard too. I mean, it's highly contested, and it's it's like, do you bring them in? Do you let them come in naturally? I mean, I think the controversy comes in that they want to bring them in so that they basically have a resource in which they can bring in hunters to hunt them, which doesn't sit well with wolf lovers.
No, and I don't blame them. I mean, even from a conservation thing, state of mind of being a biologist, putting fish into a river that has wild brown trout is a little bit, to me, where, at what point are we doing too much and messing with nature too much? But
yeah, it's a balancing act, right? I mean, shoot, there's brown trout all over the world. You go down to Argentina to catch brown trout. You can go to I think New Zealand probably has them. It's just it's weird. Like, I guess if there was a water, and it's from my understanding, and I could be totally wrong, that these waters in and you might not even know this, but like down in Argentina, in New Zealand, it wasn't really a big deal because they weren't displacing any. There wasn't any sort of fish filling that ecological niche. So it's like, well, it's not going to hurt anything. They're going to go in there and they're going to eat bugs and whatever. They're not replacing something. And I could be wrong, but as far as I know, that's kind of the case. But in America, that wasn't really the case because we had those native brook trout. We had golden trout, and your rainbows were sea run. They were steelhead for the most part. And I guess maybe I'm wrong there. Is there any intercontinental native rainbow trout streams, or were they all sea run at one point?
So I believe California. So the way I understand it, west of the Rockies is native rainbow trout territory. East of the Appalachian, plus up in the Great Lakes region, is native brook trout region. And then in between there, I believe, is just cutthroat between the two mountain ranges.
Okay, cuts and goldens. That's right. That's what I was forgetting. Cutthroats.
Yeah.
That's right. And bull
So and
are they introduced too? I thought they were native.
bull trout are native. I just don't know their range, so I couldn't tell
Okay.
you. Yeah, I know those are in Montana and like the Missouri River and stuff like that. I
Yeah,
believe.
they're like a mountain species, if I'm not mistaken. I probably am, though. I shouldn't talk about it. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Which has never stopped me before. But,
Mhm.
you know, you can't let facts get in the way of some good bro science. And so currently right now, you're kind of focused on looking for another fisheries job, or are you putting more focus on guiding, or both?
I think right now my plan is to just go into guiding.
Okay.
I'm gonna try to pursue that for a few years, see how I like it. I really enjoyed it when I did it in Colorado. I would have liked a little bit different circumstances for who I was guiding for and stuff like that. But yeah, I really enjoyed being on the water with people and teaching people the sport. I've been very blessed to do a lot of stuff in this sport. I've been doing this for half my life now. I started when I was 11 years old. And Joe DeMalderis, which is a guide out of the Catskills, I interviewed him once for my old podcast. And he said you kind of have to be over your pile of fish. Like that's when you kind of know that you're ready for the guide type thing. Which I don't know if I'm there yet, but to me, like I still get excited when I catch a fish, but at the same, like I'm not at that point anymore where it's like I need to take a picture of every fish because it's a brown trout and it looks just like the one I just caught.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I still appreciate each fish individually for what it is. But I just enjoy sharing it with people and bringing new people into the sport. It's been very rewarding, and I've actually learned a lot from it myself, just helping other people. So,
Well,
it's a different aspect.
You look young. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 22.
22. So okay.
Yeah.
You're a puppy. You got your whole life ahead of you.
Exactly.
Yeah. But that's cool. You've been fly fishing since you were 11.
Fly fishing since I was 11. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I love fly fishing. I don't do it much anymore. There's just not enough days and hours, to. I have so many irons in the fire. It's obscene, but I do love it. I would like to get back into it. But I get what you're saying. Like, and you're pretty young. Like you're not quite done catching some fish yourself, but you do understand the joy you get when you teach somebody and then you see them apply that and they catch a fish. Like that's where I'm at. I mean, I still have some bucket list fish. Don't get me wrong. Even in my own state. But as far as like the stuff that I guide for, I tournament fish, for bass. But I don't get, if I'm just like lately I find out if I don't have a client, I don't have a tournament that I'm pre-fishing for, and all my buddies are busy, I have a hard time finding the motivation to hook up the boat and go fishing. When it's just me, it's like, I've caught bass. I mean, I've caught fish. Like, whatever. If I go, I go. If I don't, I don't. Obviously the motivation is to stay on the bite. So when client does call, you have the confidence to put them on fish. But it's almost like I need something bigger to really motivate me now in that fishing world outside of just myself. Now, if I had planned a trip somewhere to go catch something I haven't caught yet, and it doesn't necessarily have to be anything crazy, literally anything of any size is on my list of things to catch. So, I've caught cutthroats. I have not caught the golden trout, which I think they're like endangered, fairly certain.
Yeah.
But figure out where those are, and go try to catch those would be awesome. I've never caught bull trout. Bull trout is definitely on the list. So there's Also, Arctic char. I'd love to catch Arctic char.
Yeah.
I guess there's a couple of places you can get those in the lower 48 up in the mountains.
Yeah, you can catch Arctic char out of, I know this, out of Dillon Reservoir in Colorado.
Oh, even in Colorado. Okay, because I think there's some in Montana, some in Idaho that I found. I haven't had the time to go try to chase them down, but that would be pretty cool. I mean, those are awesome. There's a lot of those, like Arctic char are high on my list because those things, especially when they're breeding, holy cow, those things are like unbelievable. The paint job on those things is unreal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, was that Iceland or Greenland? Is that where they get them?
Yeah, I think they're in Canada and Alaska too, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure. I think anywhere like near the Arctic Circle has them, but they're just, man, those things are unreal.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe brook trout are part of the char family, are they not?
They are, yes. Yeah, they're a char.
Yeah, so they're not really a trout; they're a char.
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't know what's the biological difference there? So I think they're close enough that they can hybridize because the tiger trout, which we mentioned, is a brown trout, brook trout hybrid. Mm-hmm. And you got what's the lake trout, brook trout, splake. But those are lake trout is a char too, is it not?
I would assume so. Yes, I would assume it's a char.
I'm pretty sure. Do you know what the difference is? The definition difference of a char and a trout? I should look that up real quick.
No idea.
No idea. Some biologist you are.
I'm just kidding. I can give you the scientific name of brook trout. That's about it.
Yeah. What is what you got bucket list fish?
I do. Bull trout is definitely up there. I would love to spend some time in BC doing some bull trout fishing. Arctic grayling, but I would really want to do that in like Alaska. I know they do have some streams here in Montana that have grayling, but I would really like to do that up there in Alaska. Probably golden dorado.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Pretty sweet.
Yeah, those things are wicked.
Yeah. And a lot of destination stuff. Like I'd love to go to New Zealand, Argentina, stuff like that.
I don't know. I find it, I mean, the scenery would be cool to go to like Argentina. I find it weird to travel halfway across the world to catch a fish I can catch right here. It's the same way, like I'm a waterfowler. I don't know if you hunt or not, but like you can go to New Zealand and shoot Canada geese and mallard ducks. Like that seems really weird to me that I'm literally going to fly all the way around the world to go shoot something I can shoot right here in my backyard. Like that doesn't make sense to me. If I'm traveling to a far and away land, I want to shoot something, fish for something that I can't get right here. Like that. Yeah. That's kind of like the point of traveling.
Yeah. Well, I think with the brown trout in New Zealand, like you have brown trout that are disproportionately big. Like they're a lot bigger than our fish on average. Plus, they don't have birds of prey in New Zealand, so these big, like huge browns just sit in inches of water, and you can sight fish for them while you're staring at a 20-pound brown trout.
That's right. Well, I mean, there's giant ones to be had like in the Great Lakes.
Oh, for sure, and I've caught some of those, but I mean, a lot of those are stocked too.
Yeah, fish. I guess I don't. Well, I think some of the browns naturally reproduce in the Great Lakes. I think maybe not. I guess
I'm sure there's a degree of it, yeah. But like we catch them in New York, and they're basically a salmon.
Okay. Yeah, I like in Michigan has a large population of large browns. Again, bucket list thing, something I say I'm going to do every year, and every year I don't do it, but is to go to Michigan and ice fish for giant brown trout. I think that would just be, dude, I can't even imagine 20-pound brown trout through a hole in the ice. That would just be ridiculous.
Have you ever gotten any big muskies through the ice?
I've never caught one through the ice. I have caught some muskies open water, but never through the ice. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I've seen some monsters caught through. I don't ice fish, but I've seen some monsters caught through the ice.
Yeah, it would be. They don't bite that much through the ice. I'm not sure why. Whether they just kind of go more dormant in the winter, or maybe people just aren't. ice fishing with big enough baits. I'm not quite sure what the thing is. Nobody really targets them. And we have a lot of musky lakes here in Minnesota, but I don't know of anybody that targets muskies through the ice. They catch them usually accidentally if they're tip up fishing for pike, or even walleye fishing. Sometimes somebody will just accidentally hook one and bring it up. But as far as I know, nobody targets them, but it'd be pretty cool. I mean, tiger. So speaking of hybrids, like tiger muskies, I've never caught one. They're on my bucket list. We got a handful of lakes here in Minnesota that have them, but never got into that. Have you ever fly fished for muskies, or have you ever fished for muskies at all?
I have fly fished for muskies, and actually one of my first outings, I had got a take on one of my but I was not ready for it at all.
Impressive.
And I tried. It was just pure, like it was nothing that I did. It was just pure chance, and I had 3 big strips, and it just blew up on it. And like I trout set on it so hard, I was just not ready for that. It was just unlike anything I've ever experienced.
Where was
That was in a stream, and then I did it in a lake, and I was figure eighting my fly, and I had just a muskie just pop up like an alligator. No, I felt it nose the tail of my fly, and then went straight back down. But that's a heart race fish. Those are sweet.
Oh, for sure. Hey, it's one of the good things, like if you guide for muskies, is that you don't necessarily have to catch them for it to be a successful day. If you lay eyes on them, that's a successful day, because you don't, obviously, to hook one and to hold one and to get the pictures, that's the ultimate goal, obviously. But as someone who has fished for muskies, when you just get that follow, and it's a giant, and you're doing whatever, and all of a sudden you look down and here's this just enormous fish boat side, your heart stops, you stop breathing, then the adrenaline kicks in, and I mean, it is an experience that even if you don't catch that fish, you got that rush, and clients will usually leave pretty dang happy just to get that rush. But obviously catching them is hooking up and just feeling all that power. I mean, it's not like you're in for an hour fight or anything. The fight's usually pretty quick, but it's mega violent, and it's like everything you can handle for 5 minutes. It's pretty fun. I was asking that because before we start recording, you do some competitive fly fishing. Where does that take place?
So most of that is done in the Northeast, primarily New York, mostly Pennsylvania, kind of like Penn State area. There's a pretty big following there. There's also a Southeastern Fly Fishing League, which is like your Carolinas, your Georgia. They have a pretty big league down there too, but ours is mostly just Northeast, Pennsylvania, and those kind of streams.
So obviously you have to travel over there to do that. You were saying they didn't really do anything this year because of COVID, which makes sense. A lot of tournaments got canceled. We have a big, giant ice fishing contest up here that got canceled just recently. So yeah, it happens.
Yeah, like I was in Colorado, and Nationals was supposed to be held there, so I was going to go watch just because what a learning opportunity to see those guys that are going to be on the world's team and stuff like that. But that got canceled shortly after.
For sure. I'm connecting with the muskies because I know of every spring there's a muskie fly fishing tournament. I think it's in Tennessee, somewhere in that neck of the woods anyways.
Yeah.
I've had invites before, and I'm like, I haven't picked up my fly rod in years, and I've never fly fished for muskies. I'm not sure I'm the partner you want.
I've fished with one of the guys that won that before. He's out of Buffalo too. His buddy ties his flies. It's called Nightmare Muskie Flies. Oh no. Nightmare Muskie Flies is the sweater that I'm wearing. His company is called Streamer King Flies. There's 2 really nice muskie tires out there in Pennsylvania, but he ties Streamer King Flies. He tied the fly that won that, and I actually fished with the angler, not for muskie, but we fished for trout and stuff.
Oh, okay.
He won that competition down there one year.
Wow, that's pretty cool. That's pretty wicked. That's a different beast. I mean, they're fishing rivers. It's muskies. Like there's a whole lot going on there. That would be fun, and I would have done it. it wouldn't have fit into my schedule. And I was going to do it just for the experience, like with no aspirations of being competitive in it whatsoever. But talk about a whole like interesting adventure or experience to be a part of. Like that is a different thing. I mean, not only competitive fishing, but competitive muskie fishing, then competitive muskie fly fishing. Like just make it as hard as possible.
Yeah, well, the best thing about it, like, had you just gone down there for that tournament, how much you would have learned in just that one weekend.
For sure.
Like, that's my first year. I think I've been competing 4 years now, but just that first year competing, how much I learned is incredible. And that if you do want to learn, I mean, maybe you're not in it for the competitive aspect, but just showing up to like a competition and competing just to learn and become a better fisherman, you'll learn so much.
That transfers to any type of fishing too. I mean, we when I joined a bass club here, a few years ago and started first tournaments I ever fished. You learn so much. I mean, you get exposed to other people's styles and really what works. And I mean, it's that tournament thing where they really hone down the skill, Same thing happens, and I'm in a competitive ice fishing league, Minnesota Made Outdoors. We just had our first event, in which I was not very competitive. Had my worst finish to date. Had a rough couple of days last week. I'm mostly over it. I have my moments. Yeah, it was a bad beat, but we have I shouldn't say a lot, but we have a few young teams that have joined this year and completely new to competitive ice fishing. And it's going to be a lot of fun to watch their progress. And, they came into it with the understanding of like, they had no aspirations, unrealistic aspirations of winning the whole, becoming team of the year or anything like that. But they came into it with an open mind. And one of the teams is a woman team, which I think is great. Like I've been saying for like a long time, it's like, why aren't there more women anglers on the professional level? I mean, there's really no benefit. I don't want to come off as sounding like one of these ultra left, like liberal, women can do anything men can do. Listen, if women in an arm wrestling competition, they're going to get destroyed. Like they're physically different.
Yeah.
So I don't have any delusions that there aren't big differences between male and female. But in the arena of fishing, I don't really understand where a male would have any benefit. I don't see it.
I don't see it. The only thing I could see is in fly fishing is when it comes to weighting. I'd say there's an advantage for a man weighting versus a woman, just based on hip structure, height, stuff like that. But like out of a boat bass fishing, absolutely not. That should be a level playing field.
Yeah, I could see that, especially height ways. I mean, if you're taller, you can go into deeper water. I mean, plain simple, as long as this current isn't too strong. I'm 6'4", so I can wade in some pretty deep water. But I've been in, some pretty strong currents. The Mississippian spots, you don't want to wade that. Better stick to shoreline, relatively shallow. I picked the spot to cross one time, just to say that I crossed it, and not where most people say they crossed the Mississippi. Like most people go up to like Lake Itasca, where the Mississippi starts in their cove, because that is debatable, and it's just a little babbling brook that spills out the lake, right? So you literally get ankle deep and you walk across the Mississippi. It's like no. I was way further downstream where I crossed the Mississippi, and I got up to about not quite chest, but like mid drift. And it's not that the current was like super fast there, but the volume of water that is moving you felt it. It's like as soon as I crossed that like near shore current stream, it was a totally different thing. I was like, well, this might not have been a good idea. But I sidestepped it. I relied on all my skills of wading. I kind of grew up wading small rivers. So, the The basics are all still the same. Feeling out rocks with your feet before making big steps, small moves, all that. And I made it across. So, and then I had to get back over because that was the side of the river I was parked on. So I got to do this again now. So obviously I'm here to tell a tale. I didn't die, but probably shouldn't have done that. I don't recommend people do that. It's a terrible idea. Have you ever this is how my schizophrenic brain works, but when the day I did that was also the day I had caught a carp on a topwater lure. They happened to be up eating cottonwood seeds, and so I had a popper, and because I was up there bass fishing, I had a popper, it had a white feather on the tail. I'm like, well, this kind of looks like a cotton, let's see if I can get one to hit. But I would cast and they would scatter. If I popped it, they would scatter. Even if I reeled it, if it moved, they would scatter. They were super sketchy. So I thought, well, if I just get the right drift, so now the fly fishing skills kind of kicked in. I don't touch it. If I just get the right drift and it goes through them, one might come up and try it. And sure enough, I got the right drift. I never touched the plug. It came up. It sucked in that white feather. The fight was on, and man, those things fight good. Have you ever fly fished for carp?
I did very briefly when I was in Montana when I was 16. We were throwing top water for carp. We didn't do very well, so we started throwing things for smallmouth.
Okay.
But yeah, using I know my buddy, I do a lot of Euro nymphing. That's the competitive style fly fishing for trout. Applying those techniques to your spin, you can do that with spinning gear and do it really effective. So you don't have to just use your traditional spinning gear methods. You can use fly fishing methods up with your spinning gear and it works incredible. And vice versa. I've used spinning gear methods with flies. I mean, it's a little different, but
right.
Especially modern day streamer fishing is based on what the guys are doing with crankbaits. We're trying to make our flies look as much like crankbaits as possible.
Sure, that makes sense. I think I've seen a few flies even that will have a little plastic thing right in front of them, gives them a little wobble. At what point do flies stop becoming flies, and they start becoming lures? I mean, traditional, conventional tackle lures. I mean,
yeah. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of the stuff they're doing to mimic crankbaits and stuff has a deer hair head with a big wedge on it. I mean, so you're still making it out of feathers and stuff. I mean, I do fish some streamers a sculp, a headbanger sculpin where the head is it's made out of metal. So you're crossing the line there a little bit with lures, but I like to catch fish. I'm not a purist. Where the line's drawn, I don't know. I think as soon as you put a hard bait on there and it has its own swivel and you're not using wire to connect them, maybe that's where you get a little but I do just like to catch fish. So
and can we be honest, a strike indicator is a bobber.
That's exactly what
you're only, the hardcore fly guys, you're only lying to yourself. Nobody else is buying this.
And me and my buddies, we call them babbers. We don't even call them bobbers. We just put that A in there, and it's so funny because people do get upset about that.
They do get upset about it. They're like, it's a strike indicator. It's a bobber.
It's a bobber. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's a bobber. It's whatever. It catches fish. It's nothing to get all upset about.
I'll tell you what, trying to detect a bite when you're drifting just a nymph without one is super tough, unless you're in shallow, clear enough water where you see the take, but it's pretty difficult.
Yeah, well, that's a lot like what Euro nymphing is we don't use bobbers. We use strike indicators, which is just a colored piece of line built into our leader.
Okay.
So we rely on that moving with heavy flies. So it's you're essentially fishing like an anchor. And when that sighter moves, that's when you feel the strike. So because we're not allowed to use bobbers competitively, they're against the rules.
Even babbers?
Everything has to have a hook point on it that's connected to the leader.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I know that people use droppers. You'll have a dry fly or something made of foam or something that will float, has a hook in it, but then you have a nymph dropper on it.
Yeah, when we have to do that, that's what we do. But the European style nymphing without it is is our go-to when we can use it, but there's time and place. There's a time and place for everything.
Sure.
But,
And then, then you got your purists, right? Then you got your dry fly only guys. Like that's a whole nother level of individual right there.
They can have it because, like I said, I like to catch fish.
You're not there yet. You're only 20. You're not there yet. You'll probably get there at some point in time.
I've heard some crazy stories, like people like cutting the bends off the hook, like they're just in it for the rise, like, and they're not even. But they'll actually catch the fish sometimes because the fish took it that hard.
Just won't let go of it.
It didn't have a hook point, but it's still dug in. I'm like, fish feet on the bottom 90% of the time. That's where I'm gonna be.
I hadn't heard that. That is insanity.
Yeah.
Just in it for the rise. Yeah, but sometimes that rise is such a subtle take.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's one thing if they, it's like, whoom, they take it. But when they're doing that sipping thing like that, like, what's fun about that unless you get to set that hook? Like, I don't.
I mean, it's because I fish dries mostly as like an indicator. They're just a natural indicator that I can also catch a fish on. And yeah, sometimes it just looks like your fly got wet and it's sunk, but there's a fish on. So like, how do you even know?
And then you know what that is? That's a hobby for people that just like tying knots. I don't mean tying the flies. I mean like tying, like retying and changing lures. That's what that hobby is. Because if you're a dry fly purist and the trout aren't taking dry flies, like you don't go to the stream and you don't see them actively sipping something, like you're just going through every single thing in your box and seeing if you can find something that will elicit a strike. So how often do you tie? And one thing I love fly fishing. Like I said, I don't get to do it much, but when I did do it, the thing I found really irritating was, you cut a big, you tie on a big thing of tapered leader, and as you're trying to figure out what they're biting on, that tapered leader gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And then you got to cut it and tie a whole new tapered leader. Like, that is a pain in the butt, dude. Like, that used to irritate. Like, you get a tough day where you could not figure out what they're hitting. That started to irritate me. Like, this is no longer fun. Like, it's like a job now.
I use a lot of tippet rings just for like I hate tying line together. Like, those knots are unnecessary. If I put a tippet ring on there, clinch knot it, and I'm done.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I never really thought about that, but like I said, it's been, I don't know the last time I picked up fly rod. Like, I honestly don't. But there is something to that fly fishing that is a lot of fun. I really should pick up a couple new setups because I've been having a few people showing interest that they want to learn how to fly fish. I wouldn't take them to a trout stream personally. I'd just get up on the flat deck of my bass boat and we would just catch bluegills all day long.
Yeah.
Great way to learn, and you can make a crappy cast and still catch a bluegill. And that just keeps you doing it. That gives you the motivation to keep going. But, I think anybody that teaches fly fishing, just the mechanics of it, I think most people will agree, like, the best place to learn how to fly fish is in your backyard. Don't tie on a hook, nothing, because the concept, especially if people had experience fishing before, that you try to get across and you have to like retrain their brain, is you're not casting the lure. You're placing the line out there, and there happens to be a hook on the end of it because the lure itself is like incredibly light. And you're using a weight forward line or whatever, and that's a weird concept for a lot of people to understand.
Yeah, and I also think that casting is overrated. I think there's too much emphasis. Like, and don't get me wrong, I learned in my front yard casting that way, but guiding just people new to the sport, like, you don't really need to know how to cast to catch fish, in all honesty. So it really needs to come down to what they want to learn. Like, if they actually want to learn the sport and they want to learn to cast, because I've had people been like, hey, like I want to actually learn, I want my cast to look kind of like your cast. And I'm like, okay, then we'll practice casting. But if they're just out there to catch fish, like, you can just flick it out there. Like, especially and that's what the one was a lady, and she's like, my cast isn't that pretty. And I'm like, well, you just caught a fish, so I have no complaint. Like, you're not tangling every cast. like that's where it comes in. Like if you're tangling, then obviously you need some casting instruction. But if you're not tangling every cast, you can get out there and catch some fish. I don't care what your cast looks like. Let's catch fish.
Stop watching a river runs through it. You're not Brad.
Exactly. the whole shadow. Have you ever heard the concept of a shadow cast, where you get them to rise and your fly didn't even hit the water?
I actually just watched that movie, coincidentally
awesome.
enough, like 3 days ago. I shouldn't watch in air quotes. Like I took a nap to it, started it, woke up at the end, but it was on. I think I did wake up in the shadow casting scene where he like ends up catching that giant brown, and then shortly after that he gets killed. Spoiler alert. But it's a good movie to take a nap to. It really is. Very peaceful.
Yeah. It's 4 hours.
Is it really that long?
I think so. I think it's 4 hours.
That was a solid nap then.
Yeah.
I think that's just called going to sleep at that point.
Mm-hmm.
The casting thing, I am by no stretch like a great fly caster. I can get the job done. But like you're saying, you don't need to be Brad Pitt and a river runs through it to catch fish. I would think, if anything, the one technique to learn would be just the roll cast, which is super simple. When I was trying to learn it, I was reading about it, and I thought it was like you make this like loop with your hand kind of thing to do a roll cast, and I was fishing this really small stream in western Wisconsin, and I was basically just flipping it out there. Like I said, there was too much brush behind me to do any sort of cast whatsoever, and just struggling to get it down there and get a good drift. And this guy's like, "We'll just do a roll cast." I'm like, I can't do a roll cast, dude. I don't even understand it. And he's like, "What do you mean? It's like the easiest thing ever." Mm-hmm. And he's like, and then he just showed me. It's like, "Oh, that is not what I thought it was." Basically like lift your line straight up, let that slack come down, and when you have that loop, just drop it, and that just flips out there like that little, kind of like back when we were kids, like just with ropes, or you see those big muscle bound dudes, They're doing the rope thing. That's basically what a roll cast is. You're just getting that loop, so then that energy transfers all the way out there, and then you replace that fly. It's like and like I learned it in like 10 minutes. I was like, geez, that's like so simple. Yeah. That's not what I thought it was at all.
Once you learn that, that's the foundation from every other cast in the entire sport. Mm-hmm. Just that roll cast.
And then I started. He helped me out a lot. I mean, that day, it's like I didn't really understand like nymph fishing, and that's what they were eating. I was trying to get them on these dry flies. It was wintertime. I'm using like the size 22 midge. And they weren't taking it. I mean, it's not what they're eating. And he's like, "Oh, let's put on this pheasant back or whatever the hell it was, bead head." And so I put that on there, and he's like, you got to watch the tip of your line. And we didn't use strike indicators. We didn't use babbers. Just got to watch your line. And then I would see it would slow. It wasn't even like a twitch or anything. It's like the drift would just slow down, like it for no reason. And then he's like, "There's a bite right there." And then I would just, lift the rod tip up and catch a giant 8-inch brook trout.
Monster.
But it was fun, dude. That didn't matter to me. Like the size had nothing to do with size. Like you're not going to catch a giant brook trout there. You're not going to. They're all little, pretty much. What's the biggest brookie you've caught?
Probably only like 12 inches. That I've caught with a fly rod. I mean, I've caught them with electricity bigger than that.
Well, that's cheating.
Yeah.
Has there been streams where you have fished before, where you've caught, those 12 inches or whatever, and then you go and you electrofish it, and you're like, "Holy crap, these are in here"?
I have experienced that sometimes. I try to. A lot of the stuff is unfishable that we kind of shock. They're like small streams where you're walking through thorns and bleeding when you come out, so you can't really fly fish it. And I try to make it a point. Like part of the fun for the sport is like not knowing what's in the water. So like whenever we would shock like a big fish, like I wouldn't really go back and fish for it, just because I knew what it looked like. I knew it was already there. But you'd be surprised at the size of some of the fish that come out of some small streams. It's pretty impressive.
I learned that, like, not from personally catching it, but I remember many moons ago, like 20 plus, maybe 30 years ago, either seeing a video or a fishing show. It might have just been a magazine. The memory's hazy, but I remember somebody catching just an absolute like giant brown trout out of tiny, tiny little stream. You could jump over it in like in Montana. I think it was in Montana somewhere, but like going through the plains, like it was the lowlands. It wasn't up in the mountains. And this, I was like, what? How? Like this was like a 30-inch brown. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This fish can't even turn around in that river. Like, how is this even possible?
Well, and the biggest browns that I've ever caught, primarily with streamers and stuff, like 23 inches, 22 inches, I've caught out of spots that were only big enough for that fish. I mean, they were big. They were bigger streams, but I've never caught one of those big fish in a deep hole. Now, I haven't fished a lot of these western rivers yet, so I'm sure it's a little different here. But like back east, I caught this 22-inch wild brown that literally was underneath this undercut that was only big enough to cover its body.
Dude, there's I won't mention it here because it already gets enough pressure. But there's a stream pretty local to the Twin Cities metro area that has natural reproducing browns in it. They stock rainbows in it, but it's like further up, and it's a put and take fishery. And the browns are catch and release only because they are naturally reproducing now. This is not a big river. I will call it a stream. And most people don't fly fish it. They use conventional tackle on it. And that's what I've done. I've gone down there with spinning gear. And you don't use your normal ultralight trout rod. Like you go there with your bass stuff because this river has giants in it. And when they survey it with the electro stuff, they pull out 30 plus inches every time. And you're like, what the hell? You've got to be kidding me. I've never caught one that big there. I think my biggest out of it is like a 22 incher. Which I think that's it. I mean, when you're used to catching, a good one in a heavily pressured trout stream, a 14-inch trout is a nice keeper, and then getting over that 20-inch mark, that's a big fish. I mean, you get pretty excited. But there was one day I was down there, and there's this big, deep undercut, and it was just black underneath it. I mean, it's just dark, deep undercut, and I'm throwing like a big rapala, and I'm working it, and it was like musky fishing, like going back to what we talked about when you get that follow and you stop breathing, your heart stops beating, and the whole flush of adrenaline, like that happened. This trout came out from underneath that. I can't even call it a trout when they're that big. I feel like I don't know what other word I'm going to use for it.
Yeah.
Giant Leviathan came out and like nipped at my back hook and then just went right back underneath that thing. And I just stood there, eyes as big as saucers, mouth agape. Like if he would have actually hit it, I don't think I would have had the mental capacity to even set the hook. If he wouldn't have turned and run and set the hook on itself, I would have lost that fish. This thing was an absolute beast. This was one of those 30 inchers that they find when they're electrofishing this stretch of stream. Unreal. So I just kept casting. I got that fish to move one more time, and that second time he just barely, he like slid out from that just enough for me to see him and slid right back in. He didn't even really chase the bait that second time. I was like, oh my God. I let him for let him be for a couple hours, hit him on the way back out, and he didn't budge.
Yeah. And that's what I love about brown trout are my favorite because I primarily only trout fish, but brown trout are my cup of tea because you get the daintiness of a trout, but when they get that big, they are predators.
Dude,
they are musky with brown spots.
They can eat whatever they want.
Yeah,
I mean their mouth is so big. When they're that, it is so big. They are not sipping mayflies.
Yeah,
they're done with all that. They're eating smaller trout, probably. They're eating frog, mice, crayfish.
Someone throws a Big Mac in there in the metro city area, they're eating that.
They probably would. They can eat whatever the hell they want. These things are absolute giants. And like I had the thought of like, how do you even fly fish for one of these things? You're not going down there with your fly weight. Like you're gonna need your like an 8 weight at least. To tangle. This thing is going to give you all you can handle if you hook up to it. Like this is like catching a muskie. This thing is huge.
Yeah, well, and like you said, you're not even throwing Like you're not throwing nymphs at that. They're not going to eat those.
No,
Like you're throwing your big streamers that look like that
Yep.
rat pillow that that's
Yep.
what you're doing.
Yeah, some big, 5-inch streamer of some sort.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, how do they get? I've always wondered that too. It's like, and I've never used those big streamers. Like in current like that, how do you get that down where that fish is living? Do you got like lead wrapped around the hook when you tie it? Like, how are you weighting these things to get it down there?
Yeah. A lot of them, like in those situations, like a small stream, if you're not fishing a weighted fly, you're probably not going to catch a lot of fish. I know a lot of the bigger streams, like in Montana and even the bigger rivers in Pennsylvania, we use sinking lines just because you have more time to get it down. But yeah, I put big heavy tungsten beads on them, big sculpin heads. They're like 4.5 millimeters of tungsten, and you can drop that thing and like jig it like a bass lure.
I never thought about that tungsten, and I should have, because tungsten is big in the bass world now. It's big in the ice fishing world now for panfish, because you get that weight without a giant profile like you would with lead. Never really thought about that with flies. Like that would be, I hate to use the term game changer, but that would make a big difference. Not that it's a game changer, but it would definitely, you're losing the bulk of that lead.
Yeah.
So you're able to buy a much better fly.
Every nymph in my box, other than my super unweighted stuff, has a tungsten bead on it.
Never even thought about that until just now. Interesting. Now I kind of want to go fly fishing. We do have a winter season here in Minnesota. I should figure out, that's probably kicking off here pretty soon if it hasn't already. It's catch and release only, where it's open. That'd be a lot of fun though. Have you done much fly fishing for bass?
I've done a little, not so much. I did a lot of smallmouth last summer, not last summer, the summer before, because I was on the Allegheny River. So that's why I did most of my muskie fishing and smallmouth fishing. But no, not a lot of lake stuff for largemouth or that. But smallmouth on a fly rod are pretty impressive. I caught some like 7-inch smallmouth that I thought were like 15 inches.
Well, if you want to tangle with the 20-incher, come on out. We have a spot here in Minnesota where it's below a power plant where the river stays open, and these things just stack up. I mean, the schools down there are ridiculous. I haven't fly fished for them. Actually, I'll just use conventional tackle, and actually will use live bait at times, which I never do. But that seems to be like the most effective method. Just drift a sucker minnow, and it's like the most simple rig, little hook, one tiny split shot. I mean, you're catching these things in 3-4 feet of water, and you don't even need to wade. You can just fish right from shore. You can wade if you want to. But some guys will go down there with fly fishing gear, and they do quite well. It's a lot of fun. So if you get bored this winter,
yeah, well,
come on out.
I wanted to try doing it in Lake Erie because there is some guys that do that, because we had a power plant out in Dunkirk where they would do the same thing. The warm water would come in, they'd stack up in the spring to spawn. I just never got around to doing it. But
this isn't even spawning. Like, this is just, they congregate there. I mean, in general, smallies will form big schools in the winter, whether it's in a lake or a river, and they really pack in tight. And it just happens like if there wasn't the power plant, they would still do it. They would just be under ice, and you wouldn't really have a way of effectively fishing for them. But because the power plant keeps that river from freezing, even in 20 below zero temperatures, you can go down there and open water fish. I mean, it's fun. Like, I like to go down there, get tired of using the short ice fishing rods in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
Minnesota, we had some pretty long winters here, and it's nice to go down there, break the long rods out, do some casting, catch some fish. It's like it's a nice change of pace. And there is something very cool about just that whole experience of, it's cold, it's snowing, or there's snow on the ground or whatever, and I'm open water fishing. There's steam coming out. Like, it's pretty damn amazing. And I actually and I've talked about this on the show multiple times, but I love going down there when it's super cold. If I can go down there when it's like well below zero, midweek, I have that spot to myself. So it's not a good spot. Everybody knows about it. It's a little bit of a hike to get into. Really not that bad. But if you get a nice warm winter day, it's above freezing, sun's shining, it's going to be way too busy there on a weekend. It's going to be way too busy for my liking. If I go there on a random Tuesday and it's 20 below zero and everybody's just hunkered down in their house, I'm the moron that'll go out there. And it's just super cool. I mean, you need to warm your hand up. You just stick your hand in the water. I mean,
Yeah.
way warmer than the air.
Yeah.
Way warmer than the air. The problem is you pull out your wet hand and it instantly
really freezes.
Yeah. It's not really a good way of warming up your hand. It feels good at first, but you're like, yeah, this was a bad idea.
Yeah. Likewise, like I love fishing in the winter just because, fishing's become really popular and the winter time makes those crowds less. So that's the time to fish.
Yeah, for sure. If you had, so let's say like your bucket list fish, we already went through that. Like you wanted a Dorado. Is that what you said? Like the golden Dorado, which for people that might not know, that's not the Dorado mahi dolphin fish in the ocean. That's totally different. Those things are ridiculous. Like the chompers on those things, like you're not lipping those like a largemouth.
No, and they eat flies like the size of a muskrat.
They got some teeth on them. Yeah, I mean, I would think fly fishing for like peacock bass would be pretty damn fun too. I mean, those things get some pretty explosive strikes.
Yeah, I was gonna try to do snakehead.
That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
doable. That's right here in this country. You don't have to go down southeast for that. Florida, Georgia, they got snakeheads all over down there. Well, they got peacock bass too. No.
Even just Maryland, they have snakehead in Maryland, and I actually just found some in Pennsylvania, which is not good, but they have some.
Oh, wow, they've gone all the way up to Pennsylvania now, huh?
Yep.
That's crazy. How are they just traveling via the river system? Is that how they're expanding, or are people dumb enough to actually drop them in there on purpose?
I think it's the latter, to be honest, and especially because it has gotten popular. Like I've seen a lot on social media, like people posting snakehead stuff, and they're like, hashtag catch and release, and they're like, well, these fish aren't invasive anymore because there's so many of them, which I get, but like had I still caught one,
they're still invasive. Like no way. I mean, it's a weird thing, right? Like we talked about that earlier. Like they've been, carp at one point in time were invasive, but now they're considered naturalized because they've been here for over 100 years. The environment, they've adapted to the environment has adapted to them. You can't not call a snakehead, and it's not invasive. Like, come on, dude. Those things are brand new on the scene. Relatively, like what, 20 years, maybe. Max. Yeah. They've been in the waters, like,
and they just take over a system.
Oh, they're so voracious. I think the word would be. They just eat everything. They're a lot of fun, but I mean, come on.
We were going to go do it, and I said, I'll catch them, but like just the biologist in me and the conservationist in me, like I was going to have to kill everyone that I caught.
Yeah, and to me, it's like that's guilt-free. If you don't even like to eat fish, I don't care. Fertilize your garden with it. Throw it in the weed. Who cares? Because you're actually doing a service by not putting that fish back in the water. Not that you're really going to change much. If they're in it, they're in it. I mean, it would take some large-scale, extremely expensive program, and even that, I don't think you would be successful. I mean, once that is, well, that's just something you never put back. That one never gets put back in the box. Like once that thing is out, man, those things are out. Which really, really would like people to not do the bucket biology thing with species like that. You just do irreparable harm. I'm not like a diehard purist as far as like if there's some sort of accidental, obviously you try, you do your best to not infect new waters or land with some sort of invasive species, but it does happen. Like the analogy I use, humans are weird. Whenever we find a chunk of land or water or whatever, we assume it's supposed to be that forever in perpetuity, which isn't really how nature works, right? Things expand, things change, landscapes change, environments change, climates change in the absence of humans. Like this has been going on for, forever. With that said, we try to live responsibly within those confines and not have this like, careless effect on everything. The analogy I use is if there's an island let's just say in the Pacific, right? Nothing's on it. It just has some bugs, some birds, whatever has been on it since the beginning of time. Man lands there on a boat, steps off because the captain needs to drop a deuce or whatever, and in doing so, a mouse that was stowed away on that boat lands on shore. Now you have this population of mice in this island where there never were mice. They eat the grains, they eat bugs, they do whatever. They change the ecosystem of that island for forever. That would be looked at as like a great sin by most people. Like, we screwed that island up. However, let's say there was a giant hurricane, and in this hurricane, of all the trees that it uprooted, and it created this giant raft, and on this giant raft was a colony of iguanas. These iguanas made it to that island. They hop off that raft. They find this island that is just loaded with fresh greens and bugs everywhere, and they do the same thing. And now they are on this island. That would be considered nature, and I don't see the two things being that different. We would see, well, I guess that just happens sometimes.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be a sin, that because nature did it. But we are a part of nature. I mean, we have the ability to take precautions, and I get that. And I'm not saying that we should just willy-nilly go from one place to the other. But when something does happen and it becomes too big of an issue for us to control, at some point you have to go, well, I mean, life finds a way, right? I mean,
yeah. For sure, and that's actually really interesting because, like in Lake Erie, we deal with the zebra mussels and the gobies and stuff like that. But those are invasive. Zebra mussels are invasive species, so are gobies. They came with the village or the ships or whatever that when they came in.
Yep.
But those invasive species have dramatically changed the ecosystem. Like our smallmouth bass population in Lake Erie is incredible because of that stuff.
Yeah, it's become a destination smallmouth fishery because of those two things. And we've had the same thing happen here. One of our big marquee lakes, Mille Lacs Lake, known for its walleyes, but now known, for giant smallmouth bass too, is we've got zebra mussels, and it was already a clear lake, but it's become even clearer, which obviously has changed how you fish. The zooplankton, the phytoplankton, and the stuff that those mussels are filtering out has changed the ecology of that lake for sure, for forever. There was like a giant bloom of them, and now it seems like they're actually kind of dying off. And now we're starting to see some evidence that some of our diver ducks are starting to pick up that they're a food source, which they were a new species at first. They weren't preyed upon by birds, but now it seems like, through stomach contents and stuff, that the ducks are starting to figure out. So it's starting to find that balance, right? Nature will always find a balance, even when you introduce something new as a snakehead. Again, I'm not saying this is free license to just go drop snakeheads. If we can avoid contamination, we should avoid contamination. But when it does happen and you can't control it, at some point in time, you can't just keep throwing money at it, wasting resources and time. There becomes a time where you have to realize, okay, kind of like the common carp, where you kind of got to throw your hands up and be like, well, we got them now. I mean, here they are. We didn't do a good job of stopping them. They got in here. They're in here now. Now what do we do? Well, what you do is you manage them like you would any other game species or whatever. You set limit or set no limit, or do what you can. But it just seems like you're never putting that stuff. Once it's out of the box, it's really hard to stuff back in there. But
and as a biologist, the thing you see a lot is we're constantly trying to bring things back. Like, there was a thing going around for a while, and even like putting the wolves in Colorado again, like there was a thing going around where they're going to try to bring back the woolly mammoth, and they're like, it's good for the natural grasses of the Everglades.
Sure.
Well, the Everglades have evolved. Like extinction is a part of evolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that's a part. Like, and don't get me wrong, I know humans are responsible for a lot of things that shouldn't have happened extinction wise. But it's also a part of evolution. The world has evolved with that stuff gone. You can't just bring it back.
Well, I think humans get blamed for a little too much. I mean, if you want to bring up the woolly mammoths and mastodons and the megafauna from the last ice age, a lot of our theories in that I think are absolute garbage. I think they're just, like the Clovis first people, like that whole theory which is widely accepted, by the way, is founded upon one tool that they found in a cave somewhere. And with that one tool, they came up with this big story about how people crossed the land bridge from Russia and Alaska, came down, and the Clovis people, and that's how we populated the Americas. And it's like off of one tool. You got all that because you found a tool like that. And if you try to refute it with any of the new evidence that's coming out on, not to get too off topic, you are fought. They will fight you tooth and nail. It is so hard to change the established historical belief or archaeological belief. When these things get established like that, it's so hard to change the tide on it. And in the face of obvious evidence. But going back to like the megafauna dying out, it's often said that when the Clovis people came down, they hunted these giant megafauna to extinction. So you're telling me a handful of people that survived crossing the land bridge, which, mind you, short-faced bears were a thing, a large predatory bear, larger than polar bears, larger than our current grizzlies, long-legged, long snout. These are chase down, prey, kill, eat animals. Like, these aren't your scavenger blueberry eating bears. These are predatory bears. So they survived that. They survived saber-toothed cats. We had an American lion, which is bigger than the African lion, on the Great Plains of North America that lived. We had a North America cheetah. We had all sorts of stuff that could kill primitive man pretty easily. We went down there with sticks and stone chip spears and hunted these things to extinction. Mm-hmm. Please tell me how realistic that sounds.
Yeah.
Not a chance. But we do know that there was some sort of great cataclysmic event, an impact probably, that that's what wiped everything out. But it's just so easy to have this like self-loathing, humans are all bad, always have been bad, we're the worst thing for this planet. And we can also be the best thing for this planet, because I don't see any elephants out there forming any wild turkey federations and trout unlimited. I don't see any elephants out there setting land aside to increase habitat. There's only one animal on this planet doing that, and that's humans. So as much hate as we get for destructive stuff, and we are destructive, I'm not saying that we're not. We do a lot of pollution. We do a lot of, collectively we do a lot of shitty things to the earth, but we also do a lot of great things for the earth. Mm-hmm. We're the only animal that has that foresight and the ability to do that stuff. So, I don't know what you do with all that information. That was a really weird rant that I just went on. That's how my brain works. All right.
Yeah, that's all right. It's true. It definitely. I haven't thought about it that way myself either. We are the only animal that does that.
Yeah, it's like I said, and you reiterated, like we're trying to get back. And in some places, I really like that reintroduction thing. Not so much with the mammoths, but if we can bring things back to a natural state where it's a well balanced, where it works for people and wildlife, I'm all for it. These natural crossings over freeways. There's a project being pitched out there about like restoring the Great Plains. Building the next great national park system. As these really small rural towns are dying off in the Great Plains because the commerce isn't there anymore. The people living there are just because they lived there for their entire life and they don't want to move anywhere. But when they, unfortunately, people get old, they die, and those houses come up for sale and nobody's buying them. Instead of some giant corporate farm buying them and raising more corn for ethanol that we don't need, these projects are starting to buy up those properties, and they're trying to link together this vast network of land where then they can just let that go back to the way the Great Plains were. Like, I think that would be sweet. Start building our freeway systems to go up and over it, and then you have these places where you can pull off and have these overlooks, and you could see giant herds of bison and elk. Before elk were hunted to near extinction by man. Like I said, I'm not absolving humans from doing some atrocious acts. They weren't a mountain species like we see them now. They were out on the plains, in these giant herds. And so I think it would be really cool to get back to a place where we could see that, industrialization to where we market hunted them to the brink of extinction, and getting those back to having, wolves and coyotes and foxes out, that whole ecosystem. I think that'd be very cool. Part of that makes sense to me, but going back to what I was saying, where the way we find a chunk of land is how it's always supposed to be. Here in Minnesota, well, technically it's Michigan, but I don't know how Michigan got this island because it's actually closest to Minnesota than anything. But Isle Royal, there's this, this relationship between the moose and the wolves that they've been studying forever. But it's the only natural park in which we actively interfere. If the wolf numbers get too low, we trap wolves and bring them out there. And it's like we get a cold winter, cold enough. A lot of times the wolves bail. They're like, we're out of here. We didn't want to be here in the first place. And then the moose get overpopulated and they die of disease or they overgraze or whatever. But the interesting thing about that is that when we found it, it had moose and wolves on it. But if you go through the fossil records, not even that long ago, it used to be a caribou lynx island. So if you're going to mess with it, why not start from scratch and throw some lynx and caribou on there and see how they do? You know what I mean? Like, if you're already making it this test tube, well, have some fun with it. Try some different stuff. You know what I mean? Bring it back to that. Bring it back to pre-European settlement times when it wasn't wolf and moose. It was lynx and caribou. It's just, I don't know. I think we're just really weird like that we think however we find it, it should be that way forever. Nothing ever should change. Well, that is like the most unnatural thing of nature. Nature is in constant flux. Like you said, extinction is a natural part of the cycle. Nature does not favor specialists because it's a dead end. It's an evolutionary dead end. You got koalas. Koalas at some point in time, and even panda bears, they're destined to go extinct. It's going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. Long after, even if it doesn't happen on our watch, long after humans are here, they will go extinct eventually because it's a dead end. Something will happen, another impact or whatever. Who knows? Whatever, something big, giant, climactic change is going to happen. The only thing that has to happen is something happen. That's just that. And another tangent. What were we talking about? Trout fishing. That's right. Somehow we went from trout fishing to extinct megafauna. Not quite sure how I made that jump, but yeah. So what are your big plans and goals?
So I'd really love to make Team USA fly fishing sometime in the next decade. I would really do it competitively. I'd like to start being a guide, being, a regular client list, stuff like that. I have a lot of work to do in the near future for all that stuff. But
yeah, well, I mean, you got a plan. You're relatively young. I think you're on the right path. I mean, I'm 47, I'll be 48 in May, and I didn't start chasing this guy dream until 2 years ago. I was working a job and finally got to the point where I'm like, I don't want to do this. Like, I should have been chasing the guide thing years ago. Even the bass fishing, competitive fishing, like, I waited until I could afford a decent boat, and it's not a brand new anything, but I got a decent, a used Ranger bass boat for $11,000. And then I joined a bass club. I get in the bass club and I find out that there's non-boaters. I was like, what? You're telling me I could have been tournament bass fishing this whole time as a non-boater? Like, how much knowledge did I just leave on the lake that I could have been, I'd be so much further ahead today if I would have known that when I was 18, when I was 22, but I didn't. So, I had these roadblocks I put in my way, like, oh, I need this, and this before I start competitive fishing or before I try to be a guide. I like all these things I talked myself out of doing, like, who am I to guide somebody, blah, 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 blah. But you've already tackled that. You're 22, you know where you want to go, and that's huge. So I give you credit for that. Like, early on, grasping what you want. You're not a punch the clock 9 to 5 kind of guy, and that's awesome. That's admirable that you've realized that at a relatively young age. So, go get it, man. I mean, what are your smaller goals as far as, like, how are you going to get to that stage? Are there like smaller trout clubs that kind of lead into that, kind of how bass fishing works, or is it a totally different arena?
So I can start competing to make Team USA now. They have regionals across the country once they start competing competitions again. So I just have to get into those regionals and place well.
Okay.
Because I'm basically already on the circuit.
How does that scoring work? Are you going by inches? Is this like a catch, photo, release kind of a thing? Is there judges that measure your fish?
Yeah, there's judges that measure your fish. So you get 200 points per fish and then 15 points per centimeter.
Okay.
So number is more important than length, but length can make up for number when it gets tight. But yeah, you have a judge there that you have to take your fish to after every catch. You have to take it to the bank. They have to make sure the fish is okay. If fish dies, it doesn't count. It's catch and release, all that stuff.
Sure. Crap, what was I just going to ask? How are the rules as far as like what you can use, what you can't use, equipment wise?
So all hooks have to be barbless, no more than 3 flies. Your leader has to be less than 2 times your rod length. And your longest rod length can only be 12 foot. So at max, you can have a 24-foot leader.
Dude, 12-foot rod that's a giant rod.
Yeah, I use a 10-foot regularly. I've used an 11 before. A lot of our streams in the east are too small for 11, but out west here, 11 would be really nice. Lines, not really too much restriction on fly lines. Just barbless hooks and that stuff. Your beads, you can only use tungsten. You can only use a 4.0 millimeter tungsten bead or less. You can't go above that. Okay. You can't have any split shot on your line. It has to be all in the fly.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. That's good to know. So no sinkers.
Nope.
They don't call them sinkers either. I don't know what they call them, but they don't call them sinkers. Probably just weights, I suppose. They don't have sinkers and they don't have bobbers, but they do have line indicators and weights. Do you tie any of your own flies? Have you gotten into that?
I tie all my own flies that I fish.
Yeah. All right, that's pretty cool.
When I guide, I like to use other people's flies.
There's a lot of work that goes into those things. Yeah. I dabbled in it. I pretty much only made woolly buggers because they're super easy. But they're effective too, though. I mean, find a trout that won't eat a woolly bugger, dude. Like those things, like.
Yeah, it's just
there you go. Bugger. There's a woolly bugger right there.
I fish those all the time.
They're very effective. And I've used them not even fly fishing. I've used them in the summer on like my panfish rods. You tie one of those things on a slip bobber and a little bit of you will need a sinker. You will need a split shot because they're too light to sink on their own. But a little bit of that, dude. The trout or the panfish can't leave those things alone come spring. I mean, those things look just like an emerging dragonfly nymph or something, and they can't not eat those things. But that I've had the most luck as far as flies wise on for trout with a woolly bugger for sure. And I don't get crazy. Pretty much black and brown. That's all you need. You know, maybe an olive green if you want to get crazy. Yeah. Those are the bug colors, right? I mean, stick with what looks like an insect, and you're probably going to get bit. That's pretty much it. But all right, well, we're hour and a half into it. So Tyler, I want to thank you for doing this. Give everybody your where they can find you and follow along in your adventures.
So it's just my name. It's at Tyler